Hello and welcome to India Career Center, the one-stop podcast for students, professionals, parents and guardians. In every episode, we will try to deal with a current topic that needs expert advice related to career guidance and career mentoring. Please welcome your host, Dr. S.B. Mishra, to the show. And happy listening.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode on India Career Center. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Mr. Satya Bhavaraju, who is the CEO of Refroid Technologies, basically into technology which is related to data centers. While discussing about this episode with him a few months back, I had a very long conversation with him, and I found some very, very interesting facets about Mr. Satya, which I thought we should actually start our conversation with that and then come to the core topic of data centers, what is happening with respect to data centers in India, and why it is important, and how we have arrived to this situation and how we are looking at the future. Because as more and more data is being generated across the world, and of course in India as well, uh, the need for data centers will only going to grow, and which means that along with that we will have a lot of opportunity with respect to different types of careers in the future, in present also, in future as well, and also a huge impact on the overall economy for India. So to discuss all that, I welcome Mr. Satya to the discussion today. Mr. Satya, thank you for your time today and welcome to India Career Center podcast.
Good morning, SP. How are you doing this morning?
Fantastic. And how you're doing and where are you joining us today from?
I'm based in Hyderabad for the last 2 years since moving back to India. I'm a Telugu. I belong to Andhra Pradesh. So it's back in the home country, home state. Not home city exactly, but it's a fascinating place. Hyderabad is a intermix of various cultures. There's several cities like Hyderabad, but Hyderabad is unique, is what I think.
Absolutely. So, Mr. Satya, 2-3 months back when we were discussing initially to record a session with you, we had a very long chat, and I remember some very, very interesting facets of your career, which was amazing. I think some 20 years back, you were part of ABCL, which was in its early phase of beginning of the ABCL era. So take us through your personal journey, and then we'll come to the discussion about data centers.
Sure. I mean, it's been a long time. So I was born in a very small town called Eluru in Andhra Pradesh. Did my education until intermediate. Some people call it 12th, in Eluru. After that, I went to BITS Pilani. The first time I saw so many people speaking in English, that was a culture shock for me. Then I went to Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta, graduated in 1995. As I like telling people, I graduated just as the last of the dinosaurs were leaving the planet, that long back. So there were three of us from my batch who wanted to opt out of placement, although people join IIMs because of the placements. But we were very keen on doing something on our own. And that was the point in time when event management industry, whether it's brand launches all the way to public large concerts, that industry was just about beginning. And we thought we should do something in the event management space. So three of us opted out of placement and incorporated a company actually in Madras, as it was called at that point in time, Chennai. And ABCL, we saw news in business world, if I remember correctly, doing their first fundraise from Kotak Mahindra and a bunch of other investors, trying to professionalize the entertainment industry. So we wrote to ABCL, didn't have a CEO at that point in time. We wrote to a company called Saraswati Audiovisual, which is Mrs. Bachchan's company, to the CEO of that company, asking, hey, we are graduates of IIM Calcutta. We want to do something in the event management space. Looks like you guys also want to do something in the event management space. You're based in Mumbai, we're based in Chennai. Can we collaborate in some manner or fashion? So they invited us to Mumbai to make a presentation. Well, we didn't have a laptop to make a presentation on. So we borrowed it from somebody who had a laptop, one of our batchmates or seniors, I don't recall clearly. And we quickly learned PowerPoint because we didn't use PowerPoint on campus in those days. They were still the old style foils and overhead projectors, if you recall the time period I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think we will share some pictures of those because a lot of young listeners of today's time will not even understand what it is.
Right.
And I correct myself, this was 30 years ago, 1995.
Yeah, 30 years
Yeah.
ago. Yeah. Makes me feel, young to think of those times. So we went there, we made a presentation, and ABCL, the CEO designate, he was also there in that presentation. He said, "Why do you guys want to do stuff on your own? Come and work for ABCL for a couple of years, build your network of connects, learn the industry, then you can go and fly and do what you want to do." And before we could make up our mind, I mean, we were three of us, sitting in a conference room, thinking what it is that we should do, because on one side there were dreams, and the other side, this gentleman unexpectedly making an offer to come and join them. So before we could make up our mind, the CEO, his name was Sanjeev Gupta, who later went on to head Coke as a CEO in India. He called us and said, "Mr. Bachchan is here. Would you like to meet with him?" We said, "Okay, why not?" And so we went inside to his room. He was using his wife's office at that point in time. ABCL still didn't have an office. And he said, "Thank you very much for agreeing to join ABCL. We want professionals like you to come and help me to professionalize this industry." And, we were tongue-tied because at that point in time, and possibly even today, Mr. Bachchan is the biggest star that India has known. And people, we have all grown up looking up to him. And there is a hero, that cult, that image, that aura. And he is a very humble person. I mean, in fact, when I was the first to enter the room, and he gets up from his chair, comes around and says, "Hi, I'm Amitabh."
Oh God.
Yeah.
It's a goosebump moment, I guess, even
Correct.
today.
Only after coming out of the room, we felt, we missed an opportunity. We should have said, "Excuse me, what did you say your name was?" So we, all three of us joined ABCL. We were there for a couple of years. That's where I met my wife. She happened to be a very popular, well-known Bengali television actress at that point in time. She had done lots of ads and music videos, and she came to Mumbai as a part of a talent search contest that ABCL did, which I was managing. So one thing led to the other, and she gave up her acting career and decided to marry me for some reason that I cannot find when I look at myself in the mirror every morning. But such is life. So after a couple of years, ABCL ran into some financial difficulties. So we were all looking out for other options. And I found, right from my childhood, I've always been a history buff and a technology buff. I've taken part in national science seminars and Space and Mankind, the 25th anniversary of the first satellite going into space, Sputnik, right? So I had that craving for technology, and I wanted to get into technology businesses, not as a technologist, but as a managing technology businesses, if you will. So I worked in a Chennai-based communication software company for a while, and gave them a business plan. I was covering the APAC market. I said, we should change our business models from becoming a pure software provider to actually building complete systems, collaborating with Taiwanese hardware manufacturers, for example. So I went and made a presentation to the board, and they said, "Okay, only in one condition, that you need to move to Taiwan and run this piece." So I moved to Taiwan in the year 2000, and I've been there until 2023, 2022, end of COVID, with a couple of years in Singapore. But bulk of my career, almost 22 years.
So during this phase, you saw the rise of the TSMC?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Okay.
The entire Taiwanese industry, which is actually, if you think of the global electronics manufacturing industry, from the foundries, the chips, the semiconductors that they produce, all the way to manufacturing of hardware, everything has its origins and roots in Taiwan. If you look at the largest EMS company in the world, Foxconn, it's a Taiwanese company, although it's now globally diversified. And we often think of China as the manufacturing hub, but it's actually Taiwanese investments that fueled all the Chinese manufacturing. Taiwan happens to be the third largest investor in China after US and Japan. Very interesting things. And Taiwan is a very small country. It's 26 million population, but at one point in time, it was the 18th largest trading economy in the world.
Wow.
For such a small country. So yeah, so that's all a little bit about my background. So after moving back to India, last year I joined this very exciting company called Refroid Technologies. I'll come to that in a little bit about what we do. And we're the first Indian company addressing a very tough, challenging problem that the next generation data centers are facing, which is how do you cool these data centers, which are generating enormous amounts of heat. But we'll come to that in a bit. But
Yeah.
as I said, I'm being fascinated with history and the history of technology and how human civilization has evolved and how technology shaped us.
Now, so before we move forward, during your phase in Taiwan, I mean, almost 20 plus years. So, what exactly was your role in terms of helping your organization, which was actually based out of Chennai, you said? So,
Right.
how was that?
So I worked for this Chennai-based company called Future Software for a few years before joining a North Carolina-based startup called Level 7 Systems that came out of IBM's network hardware division. So IBM once was a networking behemoth, right? They sold that business to Cisco, and a bunch of people came out of that company and started this company called Level 7 Systems, which was a communication software company that was helping very similar business model to what Future Software was trying to do. It's just that Level 7 had far more accomplished and much more senior engineers who had been in the what is called the Research Triangle Park, RTP, in North Carolina, which had some of the biggest private sector labs and the government labs and a wonderful university ecosystem. So I joined Level 7 Systems, still doing the same thing, running Asia Pac business, except in Future Software, I was doing a lot of business in China. But Level 7 was a venture capital funded company and they didn't want any source code to be sold to any Chinese companies. The earliest exposure to geopolitical reasons and all of that, right? But China was in the beginning of its own growth at that point in time. I started traveling to China from 1997, 98. Have seen companies like Huawei, which is a global giant right now, in its second office that they had. I was one of the first people to be there. And I was instrumental in actually bringing Huawei to India. Their first development collaboration with an Indian company was with Future Software. And I architected those contracts and all of that. So China grew, really, really fascinating growth. So I used to travel to China almost twice a month those days. And I saw cities literally come up within a span of 6 months, skyscrapers and shiny glass buildings. And one thing that struck me about China, and which I think is something that we should be doing a much better job of, is how the university and industry linkages that they have focused very, very laser focused, right from 97, 98. Industries getting a lot of funding, incubation support from the universities, ability to use the universities, laboratories, and the infrastructure, which startups cannot afford. China had that vision at that point in time. I think we're slowly getting there, but the faster we get there, I think it's better for us. Because as most of the startups, although there are about 1,000 startups out of the 23,000 odd startups that we have that are focused on deep tech, I think 1,000 startups focused on deep tech is not enough for a company with the kind of a potential that India has, kind of a talent that India has, kind of a number of engineers that we produce, but not just engineers, technologists, scientists that we produce year after year. I think if we're able to create enough opportunities by linking industry with the academia, because one of the issues, as you very well know, SP, is what is taught in the colleges and what is needed in the industry. I think that gap somehow needs to be bridged, and the only way to bridge that gap is to foster closer collaboration between the industry and the academia. I think we'll get there. But then back to what I was saying. So I joined this company called Level 7 Systems. I was there for about 4 years when that company got acquired by a semiconductor giant called Broadcom. So I didn't know anything about semiconductors at that point in time, except as a consumer of chips, because our software used to run on, amongst others, Broadcom's chips. But selling semiconductors was a different problem or different challenge. But somehow I saw it as a learning opportunity. And the Broadcom was organized differently. It had country-specific teams. So my focus was Taiwan. And over a period of time, I ran a portfolio of about $250 million of revenues for Broadcom. But Broadcom was market leader in everything they did. Wireless, they were market leader. Ethernet, they were market leader. DSL, broadband, they were market leader. Cable modems, they were market leader. So beyond a point, it stopped being fun. Because there is no creativity in selling, right? Creativity in structuring deals, maybe, but so I left, and one of my customer companies, their chairman, he was trying to restructure his company and build a branded networking business. That company is called EdgeCore. So he wanted me to come and join them as a chief strategy officer. So I moved, I was there, I restructured the company, trying to get them to focus on data center, which was just beginning to grow. I'm talking about 2011, 2012. Even in North America, we had these things called IDCs, or Internet Data Centers. The Yahoos, the Facebooks, the Googles, the Amazons, they were just beginning to scale out into data centers. So I went to EdgeCore, worked there for some time. And then due to some personal reasons, I wanted to come back to India, move closer to India, because my wife, her family, they had some medical issues and so on. So I moved to Singapore, which was at that point in time from Taipei to Calcutta, which is where my in-laws lived. There were no direct flights. Even now, there are no direct flights, but there are direct flights to New Delhi, at least. Singapore, it was just a hop away from Calcutta. So I moved to Singapore, joined Tech Mahindra, completely different business. Tech Mahindra had two big businesses. One was telco focused, which was the erstwhile Mahindra British Telecom, and enterprise business, which was erstwhile Satyam, which they acquired, Mahindra Satyam. So I was on the telco side of the business, and I was given a very interesting assignment to take the telco business into markets where Tech Mahindra was not present, which meant markets like Myanmar, Vietnam, Thailand. Now, new industry for me, new technologies for me, right? And suddenly I was thrown into new markets. Very interesting challenge. Particularly Myanmar was a great learning experience, because Myanmar had just opened up their telecom sector, gave out 3G licenses. So that was a good time to be there in the market, working with some of the largest telco providers, because there were no indigenous companies in Myanmar except a state-owned telecom carrier. Everybody else had come from outside. So it was a great learning experience at Tech Mahindra. While I was there, one of my ex-bosses from Broadcom, he wanted to know if I wanted to come back. He had moved on, and he was running the worldwide sales for a wireless test equipment company called Lightpoint, which was a market leader. The biggest customer was Apple, followed by Samsung. So they do production line testing of all cell phones and various other wireless devices. So he was looking for somebody to run their worldwide services. It was new to me. I never run services before. But going back to Taiwan was the interesting option, because by the time my domestic situation had settled down, in-laws were doing much better. So my wife was very keen to move back to Taiwan, because that's where she had a lot of network of friends and so on. And Taiwanese are one of the most friendliest people in the world. Also because, perhaps, this is my hypothesis, I don't know if this is true or not. Taiwan is an official name of China, right? The China that we talk about is actually People's Republic of China. And for a long time, until 1975, actually, Taiwan had a UN Security Council seat. It was the China that was recognized by the rest of the world. But slowly, once Nixon-Kissinger diplomacy, and they wanted to integrate China into the mainstream global community. Slowly, one by one, countries started de-recognizing or shifting their recognition from Taiwan to PRC, or People's Republic of China. So Taiwan slowly, at the last count, I think they have only 24 countries that officially recognize uh, Republic of China as the China, right?
Mm.
So imagine moving from 180 countries recognizing you, you having a Security Council seat, to barely 20 odd countries recognizing you, and you're a trade-driven economy. So therefore, I think culturally, or over a couple of generations, Taiwanese have started cherishing the international people that come to Taiwan to do business or to work in Taiwan. And I think that even though there is language constraint and all of that, they go out of their way to help. And I've not seen this in any other Asian country, having traveled extensively both in North Asia and Southeast Asia. There is no other country like Taiwan when it comes to hospitality, particularly about Indians. They think we're the brainiest people in the entire world. They say, computer, math, India, Hindu. That's how they call it. They're fascinated with Indians. Yep. So I did that in Taiwan for a little while. When another of my ex-bosses from Broadcom came to me and said, hey, I'm doing something very interesting and I'm looking for people who are really creative to come and help me. I said, what are you doing? The name of his company was AIQ, or Apparel IQ, right? So coming from semiconductor industry, semiconductors have changed everything around us, the way we shop, the way we bank, the way we entertain ourselves, the way we do business. At the foundation of it all is semiconductors. Everything around is smart. Smartphones, smart watches, smart ACs, everything except the clothing that we wear.
Mm.
The clothing has still remained as it has been for the last 200 or 250,000 years. So this company was trying to look at how can we make clothing more intelligent, right?
Mm.
How can we add sensors, semiconductor sensors, into the clothing, say for healthcare applications? Can you have clothing that can detect your pulse rate, respiration rate, send it via an app, via Bluetooth to your phone? And some tremendous use cases in healthcare, for example, right?
Mm.
Where clothing is something that you wear all the time. Think of senior citizens, elderly people wearing clothes and their health getting monitored over a long period of time. I was really fascinated with the concept. So I went and joined them as VP of Corporate Development and Strategy. So we raised some money, but the technology was way ahead of its time, right?
Yes.
Applications in fitness that people were trying out. There were a lot of startups in North America that were trying this, but AIQ had built one of the strongest IP portfolios in that industry. But in terms of revenues, most of the projects that we were doing were, in hindsight, science projects.
Mm.
I mean, the customers were all experimenting. They were not large companies funding millions of dollars to take something to market. People were trying to do small case studies, small field trials to see what works, right? So that time I moved to another North American company in medtech, in wearables,
Mhm.
running their business development for Asia. This was a cardiac focused biosensor company. And with them, I moved back to India before finally joining Refroid and reconnecting with the data center industry after a gap of maybe 15, 17 years.
Okay, lot of points to ponder about your journey so far. One of the first thing which you mentioned earlier is that you have actually seen China evolving since its late 90s, and you mentioned something very interesting. The collaboration between the industry and the education or academia is fantastic there. So is there something which we can actually learn and try to fix as much we can right now for the Indian education academy from China?
Um, well, I think we're beginning to do it. For example, I don't know about all the developments happening, but IIT Madras, for example, has a very healthy startup ecosystem that they, promote and nurture, and even help them to get funding. Um, but I think the tier one institutes doing something is on one side, right? But how do we get this innovation culture, and how do we bridge the gap between the curriculum that is taught in, let's say, engineering colleges
Mm.
to what is required in the industry, that is something that is a lot of work still needs to be done. For example, we hire a lot of mechanical engineers. We have to put them through a 3-month training program for them to understand whatever they've or unlearn some of the things that they have learned in colleges. And the way I think one big difference is the what I saw in China was the way that not just how they're taught, but how they're assessed. Right? If your examination system is all about you learn whatever over a period of year and you have some semester exam and some final exam, well, I don't know what it is that we are testing, but China had a lot more project-based assessments. Even at that time, for example, I was really impressed with what I saw at Tsinghua University, which was one of the leading universities, still is, or BUPT, Beijing University of Post and Telecom. That was a communications-focused university,
Fantastic.
Right? That was giving out a lot of these projects, not to one school, but to teams of students who would come there, spend 3 months to 6 months doing that project, and potentially get employed there once they graduate, right? Ultimately, if our appetite for talent runs into several hundreds of thousands, if we can create interface possibilities where people actually come and collaborate with the industry for an extended period of time, and it doesn't have to be tier 1 industries, it can be a small factory associated with or close to a tier 3 town, right? If there is a systemic way of creating those linkages, I think which we're beginning to think about, which this PM's internship program and those types of initiatives. But I think a lot more needs to be done, because in India, education is a state subject, right? Different states have different ways of approaching it. I was really impressed when I heard last week that TN, Tamil Nadu, is introducing AI into their curriculum from grade 6 and 7, right? I think that is the kind of a forward thinking that I wish other states would adopt as well.
Fantastic. Yeah. The second thing is, as we speak, I think Taiwan is actually kind of politically now kind of submitted itself to the China, the mainland China, right? I mean, so their existence in the future is just to be part of China, isn't it? I mean, what's actually, because this is what I get a perception by looking at the popular media or the news channels and things like that. But having lived over there and you understand the culture of the country better, so what is your understanding about what's happening?
Taiwanese people are fiercely independent, okay? Because what you need to think of is most of the Taiwanese population, if you leave out the aborigines, native Polynesian race, that settled, that you find in a lot of Pacific islands, bulk of the Chinese or the Taiwanese, what they like to call themselves right now, have all migrated. About 1 million Chinese migrated in the year 1945. 1 million Chinese. They were all allies of Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek was the president of China at that point in time. He lost the civil war to communists, right? And slowly he gave up city by city and finally moved to Taiwan. And as he moved, 1 million people from his administration, bureaucracy, and their families and so on, all of them moved to Taiwan. So, and for a long time after that, every year there would be some shelling between China and Taiwan. Not full-scale war, but some shelling happening all the time. So what the point I'm trying to make is the descendants of all the people who moved away from China with a kind of animosity, they happen to be at least 50% of the population today. And Taiwan is a two-party system. It's a democracy. It's a two-party system, just like the US. And they take turns, in the government. So whenever there's a party called Kuomintang, KMT, as it is called, when they come in, they're more favorable to China. They don't want to, they're willing to consider one country, two systems, right? And there is a younger party called Democratic People's Party, or DPP, which is more independent. They want to stay independent at any cost. But the economic linkages are so strong. I don't think China in their my understanding, they would never want to invade Taiwan because Taiwan is they have very excellent relationships. Now they have direct flights, which started when I was living in Taiwan. Before that, they didn't have direct flights. You had to go by a third country. There's a lot of almost now close to 1.5 million Taiwanese who live in China, building all these factories and hospital systems and all of that in China. So I think the linkages are too strong for them to be inimical towards each other. And I already mentioned Taiwanese investments into China. And China depends, the entire Chinese economy is dependent on the semiconductor technology and the LED technology and the solar panel technologies that come from Taiwan. So economics dominates politics is my submission.
I agree. I think ultimately, I think economics actually runs this world. If we just leave it to politics, probably the world will be a very, very unsafe place. So economics actually stabilizes a lot of bad politics, I would say.
Right. It will continue to be an area of political tension. There'll always be Chinese naval exercises around Taiwan and US sending their aircraft carriers once in a while. But I don't think people take that seriously anymore. In Taiwan, I'm talking about. From an outsider's perspective, it looks like there's a lot of tension.
Right. Absolutely. And that's the reason I asked this question. Yes. Great. So moving on now, let's come to our subject. But I love the way you actually contextualized the evolution of how the data centers have come to be. So take us through that conversation because through that explanation which you mentioned during our pre-episode conversation, I love that context. So please explain to our viewers about how we have reached to a level of data centers becoming so important in today's time. Take us through that.
Right. As I said, I'm a sucker for technology history, right? And how our civilization has evolved over millions of years. So when we talk about human progress all the way to today's digital economy, and we look at some seminal points or milestones in our evolution that brought us to where we are today. And if you ask anybody, hey, what are those 4 or 5 things that helped to shape the world as we came out of savannas in Africa? People will say fire. Fire happened about 1.5 million years ago. And fire gave us a lot of good things. It gave us comfort, heat that gives us comfort, keeping the predators away in the night, right? And the ability to cook. And the ability to cook is a phenomenal ability because that meant you didn't have to spend a lot of time eating as animals do, similar sized animals do, right? Now, cooking breaks down the nutrients, makes the absorption much easier. So now human beings had time to think of other pursuits. So to that extent, fire was one of the first seminal points. Then language, which came about 100,000 years ago. Language helped us to collaborate. Before that, we had the sign language, maybe some noises, but language gave symbols to physical things as well as abstract things. Love is very difficult to express in sign language, right? But love is a symbol, the word, for a lot of other things. But this was about 100,000 years ago when language started. But for a long time, language was just spoken. It was only about 3,200 years ago, Sumerians invented the first writing. It's called cuneiform. It was symbols still, but written symbols. And the significance of that is now you can transmit this knowledge to people who are not directly present in the conversation. If you and I are doing business, we could now keep records of that business. How many sheep have I sold you and how much money you have paid me, right? And credit could start because I could record over a period of time. So that helped commerce as well. And transferring this knowledge across generations. Now you could have schools where you could bring kids and transfer the knowledge in writing, which they can in turn transfer it to the next generation. So writing was one major milestone, right? And then around 3500 BC in Mesopotamia, the first wheel was invented. Wheel helped in many ways. Prior to the invention of the wheel, the physical labor or the physical effort was limited to what a human being could do. But once wheel came in, transportation, for example, became much easier. Some primitive machines came, for example, to water your fields in agriculture. How do you get water out of a well using some kind of a pulleys and, which are another form of wheels. So that was another flashpoint. And if you come to the modern times, possibly the biggest flashpoint was 1712, the invention of the steam engine. A lot of people, even I, read in my school textbooks that James Watt invented the steam engine. It's actually a gentleman called Thomas Newcomen. James Watt's steam engine came in 1765. Newcomen's steam engine came in 1712, albeit that steam engine was for a limited purpose of extracting water from coal mines so that the miners could dig deeper. James Watt significantly improved it, added a condenser, made it a more general purpose machine, which gave rise to industrial revolution. But if you look at all these milestones, they've essentially, by and large, increased human productivity,
Yes.
right? In terms of knowledge acquisition or data acquisition, knowledge acquisition, we didn't have any breakthrough seminal points like this, right? So human beings are a very middling creature. We cannot see very far. We cannot smell fine. We cannot hear faint sounds, right? We cannot navigate as well as bats do. Our spectrum of interaction with the world around us is very limited. What we can sense, touch, see, feel, and so on. And this has been the story until a 20-year period, starting in late 1600s, in late 1500s, 1590 was when the first microscope was invented. Now, when you turn the microscope towards the Earth, it was a fascinating revelation. We saw that their cells, their bacteria, their cell structures, their microorganisms, their viruses. Hell, we were living virtually with trillions and trillions of other living forms on this planet that we did not know about, right? And this knowledge acquisition gave rise to developments in biology, chemistry, medicine, and so on and so forth, until today. The second big knowledge acquisition invention happened in 1608, 1609, roughly 20 years after microscope, which was the telescope. Some people say Hans Lippershey invented the telescope in 1608. Some people say Galileo in 1609. Galileo recorded his usage of telescope, so people gravitate towards Galileo. But when you turn the telescope towards the skies, the majesty of the universe, the solar system, the galaxies, right? This cosmos that we were completely unaware of, dots in the sky, and some kind of a imaginary mathematics that went into astrology and some primitive astronomy, and with a lot of respect to humans who did work on the primitive technologies. But telescope literally opened our eyes to the majesty of the universe and told us how insignificant we are in the larger scheme of things, in a way, right? Now, thanks to microscope and telescope, the pace at which knowledge acquisition happened grew very, very rapidly. But to process this, we were still limited by human cognition. How fast can you do compute using a pencil and a paper? We had better frameworks and tools that emerged, such as calculus, Sir Isaac Newton, one of the greatest human minds that ever lived. But we were still limited by the compute capability of a human brain. All that changed in 1947. AT&T Bell Labs, which is even today fount of innovation. If you talk about US innovation, Xerox is one place where a lot of innovation came from. Bell Labs is the other place where a lot of innovation came from. And in 1947, December, There were three gentlemen who won the Nobel Prize eventually in 1956, invented the first transistor, a semiconductor device that developed into integrated circuits, chips that first powered calculators, and then started powering mainframes, mini computers, desktops, laptops, mobile phones. Everything comes from that semiconductors, right? The first invention in 1947. Now we're able to process a lot of data, store a lot of data, because even memories require semiconductors, right? But we had the next bottleneck. How do you transmit this data, say from San Francisco to Tokyo, right? The latest technology of the time was fax, if you know what fax machines are, right? Or teletext machines, which news agencies use. Now, this was not enough to transmit huge chunks of data. So we started using copper wires, using technologies like DSL to see if we can push a lot more data. We had dial-up connections to begin with, right? Then came a breakthrough in 1966, mind you, approximately 20 years after the invention of the semiconductor, of the transistor. Let me not say semiconductors were known to humans for a little while previously, but the usage in a transistor happened in 47. So 1966, there was a gentleman called Charles Cow who proposed the fiber optics theory. Okay, what we call optical fiber communication. Today, maybe our internet, the home internet also runs on fiber, or Geo fiber, or Airtel fiber, or some other fiber. He got a Nobel Prize for that in 2009. And first practical optical fiber communication was demonstrated by Corning glass. Corning makes a specialist in glasses. If you're using an Android phone or Samsung or Apple, most likely the glass for that comes from Corning, Gorilla Glass. That's the brand name in which they sell. So they demonstrated the first thing. 1977, AT&T laid the first optical fiber in Chicago. And 1998, they laid the first transatlantic submarine cable, now which could transmit terabytes of data in a jiffy, right? Today, we have roughly about 1.5 million kilometers of optical fiber laid just submarine under the seas. Now, 1.5 million kilometers, to put it in context, it can go around the Earth 37 times. Wow. It can go to the moon and come back 2 round trips, 4 trips to the moon and back. That's the amount of optical fiber that we have laid, which is enabling the transmission or high-speed transmission of all this data. What's fascinating to me, and I hope it will be to you as well, SP, is these 4 innovations that I talked about, microscope, telescope, transistors, and optical fiber, all come from the same material, sand, silicon, right? So it's not an exaggeration to say that quite literally, the modern civilization runs on sand, right? So let's quickly, fast forward to what's happening in this century, right? Today, I believe that there are 5 foundational technologies on which our civilization runs. They're semiconductors, process, store, networking, moving data from point A to point B, cloud, because we're generating vast amounts of data, needs to be stored somewhere, analytics, methods, tools, techniques to crunch this vast amounts of data and provide us insights. And for the last 2.5 years, AI. So these are the 5 foundational technologies that I think would run our civilization at least for the next 30, 40 years, before perhaps something like quantum computing becomes mainstream and a new set of applications or use cases or things that we cannot visualize today will come about. But at the core of all these 5 foundational technologies are the data centers. Just like the 20th century economy ran on oil, petroleum, its derivatives, right? The 21st century economy is going to be running on data. Often used cliche, data is the new oil, as they say, right? And just as we never noticed refineries that actually turned crude into petrol or diesel or gasoline or kerosene, data centers are the refineries of the digital world that are actually where the raw data is stored, processed, and transformed into insights. So, whether we know it or not, data centers have a very, very critical role in the way our lives run, our businesses run, our interactions run, right? Zoom runs on data centers. Enterprise applications like Zoho or Salesforce or even Gmail, it's all cloud-based. It's all running in a data center somewhere. It's just that we don't realize that. So data centers, because our economy is becoming more and more digital, it's becoming more and more prominent. How large, how many data centers are there in the world? Frankly speaking, nobody knows. We know about private data centers, but the public, government, defense data centers have not even published information. But and data center capacity is measured in the power that they consume, right? In megawatts or gigawatts. So at the end of 2023 or middle of 2024, globally, there was about 55 gigawatts of data center capacity. And it is projected that this 55 gigawatt would become close to 300 gigawatt by 2030 in the next 5 years, almost a 6x growth in the data center capacity. Mind you, it has taken us almost 25 years to build this 55 gigawatt of capacity. And in the next 5 years, we're going to be sextupling it, right? So it's a CAGR or annual growth rate of almost 27%. And there is no other $500 billion industry on the planet today that is growing faster than the data center industry, right? Let's come to what is driving this data center. AI is something that everybody talks about. Enterprise workloads, all small, medium, large businesses are moving their workloads, their CRMs, their ERPs, their mail programs, all of them to the cloud, right? Then there is OTT, we spoke about it, the Netflix and the Amazons and all of that. And social media, the Facebooks, the Instas, the WhatsApp, all of them are in the cloud, in a data center somewhere. E-commerce, the Amazons and the Flipkarts, all of them are there in the cloud somewhere. Banking is one of the largest applications that has taken advantage of data centers. All the UPI transactions we do, phone pay transactions we do, all of them reside in a data center somewhere. And increasingly, we see governance moving to the data centers. All the PAN, the Aadhaar, and several other government programs and initiatives, all of them reside in a data center in the cloud, right? So data center is a physical infrastructure. Cloud is abstract layer, a way of visualizing that there is something in the cloud. Okay. So India data centers journey started a little late. Our first data center was built by SIFI in the year 2000. Of course, VSNL, which was erstwhile Tata Communications. It's what is known as Tata Communications today. And I remember an interesting podcast of yours where you had Sanjay Srivastav.
Yes.
And he was mentioning that 30% of global internet is done by Tata Communications infrastructure, something for us to be very proud of in India. But back to what I was saying, we started in 2000, and in the last 24 years, we built a capacity of 1.8 gigawatt at the end of 2024, which is roughly 2% of global capacity. But India generates 20% of global data. So we generate 20% of global data, but all of that data is hosted elsewhere, right? So by the year 2030, we believe market analysts are projecting that this capacity will move to 8 gigawatt. There is a lot of investment coming in, and there is a concept called sovereign data centers, which everybody globally is thinking about, that data generated in a country should reside within the boundaries of that country, right? So if we are consuming or generating and consuming 20% of global data, we should ideally be having 20% of global data center capacity, which means by 2030, we should be having about 60 gigawatt, but we're only talking about 8 gigawatt of projected capacity at this point in time. A lot of room for us to grow. In fact, we have huge smartphone penetration. Roughly about 750 million people use smartphone, more than any other country. We consume 26 GB of data on an average per month, the highest in the world. China consumes 15 GB. US consumes 20 GB. We consume 26 GB. But if you look at data center capacity per million people, US has 2.5 megawatt of capacity, or 2,500 kilowatts, if you want to call it that. China has 600 kilowatt per million population. We have 100 kilowatt per million population, right? So this is also going to grow possibly close to 30% year over year in the next 5 years. And if the government mandate comes in about data nativity, at this point in time, only the banking industry is required to keep the data in country. But there is no reason why the data that is generated here, whether it's health data or other forms of data or even social media, why it should be residing elsewhere in the country, while it could be residing in here, creating jobs, propelling the local economy. So what is there in a data center? There are broadly three parts. There is IT systems, which is your compute. People call them servers. There is networking, and there is storage. That's the IT part of the data center. Then there is electrical systems, which are very important, that power the data center. And then there is cooling systems, which cool, because data centers generate enormous amount of heat. So when we say 55 gigawatt of data center capacity globally, it's also generating 55 gigawatt of heat that needs to be cooled, right? So traditionally in the IT systems, we had CPUs. All of us have heard of Intel and AMD. GPUs. So many people would have heard of NVIDIA, right? These are the two main kinds of processors. There are many other types of processors that go into data centers: DPUs, TPUs, NPUs. We don't need to go into those details. They're very special purpose processors. But broadly, CPUs and GPUs. CPUs are very good for sequential tasking. If there is a sequential task that requires a lot of logic, CPUs are best used for that. GPUs are very good for parallel processing. They have their origins in gaming industry. If you can just visualize in a game, if you're playing, there's a lot of things happening in the background, which can be broken into several parallel tasks. And GPUs were actually, the first application for GPUs was in the gaming industry. Now it's becoming relevant in the AI industry, where every task can be broken into hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, millions of parallel tasks. GPU compute is becoming very, very important. But CPUs and GPUs coexist in a data center. So these chips, as I mentioned, are very, very, very hot. Traditionally, data centers have been cooled using air. The same air conditioning that you have in your home, several times larger air conditioners are used in the data centers. But air conditioning or air cooling is not the most efficient way to cool data centers. Here I'll get slightly technical. I'll try to keep it as simple as I can. Energy efficiency in a data center is measured by something called PUE, or power usage effectiveness. Globally, the current PUEs are about 1.6 to 1.65. What that means is to run 1 watt of IT, how much electricity do you need to cool that IT? So when we say 1.6 or 1.65, to run every watt of compute, you need 0.65 watts of energy to cool that compute. Not very efficient. India, it's even worse. It's closer to 1.75, 1.8, right? This is all with air cooling. Liquid, for example, water, is almost 2,500 times more efficient than air when it comes to cooling anything. 2,500 times more efficient.
Simple
Right.
physics rule, I guess.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
As somebody told me, if you're boiling a bowl of milk on the gas, you turn the gas on, you dip your finger in the milk, it'll take quite some time for the heat to reach to the top. Whereas if you turn the gas on and put your finger on the flame, right? So air's dissipation versus liquid dissipation, there is a huge difference. So the data center industry is moving towards liquid cooling as a means of cooling, because the processors are becoming hotter and hotter and hotter, right? A typical server may be having 8 processors, let's say, running AI workloads. That could be running about 2,700, definitely closer to 2,000 watts of energy, and that much amount of heat to be dissipated. So air is not able to do that job, right? Today we are at an era where every processor GPU is almost at 700 watt, right? So we have to move towards liquid cooling, and as I was mentioning, liquid cooling brings down the cooling costs by 90% of a data center and uses lesser energy, gives much better PUE. So all in all, it's good for the environment. It's good for the pressure on the grid. When I say grid, I mean the electric grid, right? Currently, data centers consume almost 2.5% of all electricity used in the world. That's a lot. And if you couple that with the fact that the data center industry is growing at 24-25%, the grid capacities grow only 1%, 2%, 2.5%, right? So there is going to be a mismatch between the power demands of the data centers and what the grids can provide, which is why recently Amazon and Microsoft have gone and started buying and building small modular nuclear reactors so that they can generate their own power. Even in India, some data center operators, for example, Control S, is building a huge 350-acre solar farm so that they can generate their own energy. And I'm sure this is going to be one of the strategies that many data center operators will consider. India, we are, a power deficient country, although there is a lot of investment happening in renewables. Currently, we have about 440 gigawatt of capacity that is installed. Roughly about 236 gigawatt out of that is thermal, and about 125 gigawatt is renewables. Now, well, renewables are good. Renewables by themselves cannot power a data center. Why? Because take solar, for example. Solar panels can generate power about 6 hours in a day. Data centers need power 24/7.
Correct.
So even if there is solar generation happening, and solar generation is happening at a breakneck speed in the country, we still also need to push the grid capacity, because the way it's going to work is Control S, the example that I took, they're going to supply the solar energy to state electricity board and get the reliable 24/7 power from the state grid.
Correct.
So net metering, or some of those concepts that people talk about.
Hmm.
So India especially should prioritize energy efficient data center build outs. And Refroid is the first and the only Indian company that has started building liquid cooling technologies for data centers about 3.5 years ago. We're just coming out of stealth mode, finished a lot of R&D, a lot of engineering. We've announced our first products earlier this year, announced another product a couple of weeks ago. We have another announcement coming in maybe about 8 weeks' time. First customers, hopefully this quarter.
Okay.
And it's completely make in India, right? Because there are very few hardware innovations that come out of India. There are very few deep tech innovations that come out of India. So that makes me proud as a CEO of Refroid that I'm able to head a company and inspire a wonderful team that I have to make this a completely make in India initiative. So broadly, there are two flavors in liquid cooling. I'll not spend too much time on this because it may or may not be relevant or interesting. One is called DCLC or cold plate. Other is called liquid immersion cooling. In DCLC, you're running a hollow plate on top of the hottest parts of the server, which is basically the CPUs and the GPUs, and your water, deionized water or distilled water through that. And it takes the heat away, right? In liquid immersion cooling, you immerse the entire server into a dielectric bath. Think of a bathtub, and you're putting the entire server into that bathtub. Naturally, liquid immersion cooling is far more efficient than DCLC, because DCLC, there is still a part of the server that uses air for cooling.
Correct. So you need a combination of convection and conduction.
Correct. Absolutely right. So remember, I was talking about PUEs, 1.6, 1.65 PUEs. With DCLC, you get to 1.2. With liquid immersion cooling, you get to 1.05. That means to run 1 watt of compute, you just need 0.05 watts to cool that compute. It's a orders of magnitude difference, almost a paradigm shift when it comes to cooling, right? And so we also, interestingly, this dielectric fluid that I'm talking about, where you immerse the servers, traditionally chevrons or Shell, Castrol, Total, these are the companies that have made this dielectric. It's a synthetic hydrocarbon. We went and approached BPCL, collaborated with BPCL, and BPCL is very kind enough to open up their R&D facilities to us without either of us charging anything, to develop India's first make in India liquid coolant. So even from that perspective, we are putting India on the global map, right? This is a $20 billion market expected to be by 2030. And we hope that we will get at least a 5% share of that market and build $1 billion business at Refroid, right? We're also trying to work closely with Meity, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. They have been very, very open to having discussions around how they have a wonderful initiative called GPU as a service. I don't know how many of your viewers may have heard about it. Basically, GPUs are very expensive. If you want to buy a GPU server, the latest, greatest, it costs about $250,000. How many companies can afford, right? So what India AI, which is an organization under Meity, is doing is to provide per hour rental as low as 115 rupees or 200 rupees, depending on the configuration that you choose, so that small businesses, startups can actually access that GPU compute to build their own LLMs, large language models, or inference models once the LLMs become more prevalent, AI applications, right? All of which require large amounts of compute. So we have also been talking to Meity on how can we participate in this India AI initiative, as well as all the new government data center capacity that is coming out. Um, how can we, with all the e-governance initiatives, how can we make that energy efficient and green, right? And given that we are building significant data center capacities in the private sector, can the government think of incentivizing these new data center operators to achieve low PUEs, giving them some tax breaks or concessions? Elsewhere in the world, starting in places like Taiwan, in Germany, in Saudi Arabia, for example, they have very strict laws on PUE. For example, in Germany, any new data center that's going to become operational after 2026 needs to have a PUE of under 1.3, or else you cannot go live. It may be a little bit harsh in the Indian environment, but because we want the data center capacity to be built without artificial constraints. Therefore, some form of incentives and green credits and things like that is something that we're suggesting to Meity. And Meity, as you know, is headed by very tech-savvy people. India AI is full of very tech-savvy people. India AI CEO is an IAS officer, but he's from IIT Kanpur, right? And the minister, Mr. Ashwi Vaishnaw himself is an IIT alumnus, right? So we have the right people in the government. And we hope it's not about Refroid, but it's about the data center industry for India. How do we build energy efficient data center capacity? How do we build more of that energy efficient data center capacity? How do we don't build semiconductors in India yet, not the CPUs and GPUs. Even the new semiconductor projects that are coming in will be in older process technologies and things to do with memory and packaging, right? We just started assembling servers in India, right? So power and cooling are the only two areas where we can make in India. And we hope at Refroid, we will be able to put India on the global DC infrastructure map. A lot of hard work ahead, very challenging, but that's what gets me to office 6 days a week and spend Sunday on calls.
Fantastic. No, I can imagine. I think we have been in discussion for last 3-4 months to have this conversation today. So I can imagine the kind of breakneck speed at which your organization and you are moving to make things happen. So a few ideas or few thoughts which I thought I'll try to understand from you. You mentioned quite a while ago that there are 1.5 million kilometers of fiber network under the sea. But as we know now, the StarLinks of the world are actually completely changing the way the data transfer happens and things like that. So how do you see that? How do you see StarLinks of the world changing the data movement or data transfer, if I can put it in the technical terms,
Right.
in the years to come?
So one should think of StarLink as the last mile communication, right? The internet runs on optical fiber. The data centers communicate with each other because you're talking about terabits per second of speed. StarLink, cannot, it's not designed, architected to handle that kind of data speeds. It's good for satellite phone calls, basic browsing, because the internet coverage is patchy across the world, right? You don't have cell phone towers across the world, or the distribution. StarLink is a great way to supplement the existing cellular infrastructure, if I can call it that, or wireless infrastructure, if I can call it that. Starlink is a great way to supplement that. But all of these things ultimately go and depend on optical fiber. In fact, if you look at every cell tower, taking from the cell base station to a central office is still fiber. But this 1.5 million kilometers does not include the terrestrial fiber. If you add the terrestrial fiber, I don't know how many millions of kilometers it will be, because you have a fiber connection coming all the way to your home.
Yes.
Yeah. So think of that optical fiber, 1.5 million kilometers is the 8-lane highway. StarLink is a small path that dogs walking in a jungle have made for themselves in terms of comparison of size, not capability. StarLink does fill a very useful purpose. Places like Africa, Ukraine is a great example, where the wireless infrastructure was being taken down. StarLink has been the only mechanism that they've been using to keep the communication going.
Fantastic. Okay, so you mentioned about this Make in India Refroid technology, of course, to make the right kind of impact in India first, and hopefully also create global imprints across the world as we go along. So how do you see that? I mean, your technology, which is collaborated with BPCL, you said, I'm sure we are good at creating products and solutions which are far more economical compared to other countries. So do you see at some point of time moving this service and product and service across the globe also?
Yes, in fact, we've already started on that. We've just incorporated in the Middle East, in Dubai, talking to a few customers in UAE, specifically in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, also a couple in Saudi Arabia. Next year, we want to expand to North America, which is where most of the data center action happens. We're in the process of raising money, our first capital, so that we can have our own manufacturing facilities. Today, we manufacture in third-party manufacturing facilities. Even with third-party manufacturing facilities, we see a significant cost arbitrage because all our competitors are multi-billion-dollar companies based in North America or Europe, and they have extremely high overheads, right? And because of their nature, right? Even I worked in such companies, Fortune 100s before. Overhead structures are different in startups where we can be lean, mean, frugal, right? In fact, we don't even have our own office separately in the city. I operate out of the factory. Why waste money? Whatever money that we have, let's put it into engineering, R&D. That's the focus. But once we complete the fundraise, hopefully in the next 3 to 4 months, we have already started hiring several postdoc from IITs and so on, trying to bring some best minds on board so that we stay a step ahead, because this liquid cooling as a technology is changing very, very rapidly, because the CPU, GPU technology is changing very, very rapidly.
Wow.
Right? So we need to come out with new solutions, new variants of the cold plates, new types of liquids on a regular basis, right? So we need to, I personally believe whenever there is a technology transition happening at this scale, there is a great opportunity for young startup companies with the right attitude and the right strategy and execution capabilities to be disruptive and earn a place at the big boys table. That's my belief.
Fantastic. Yeah. So currently, Refroid is, how big is the team, and how do you see this? I mean, let's say in a horizon of 5 to 10 years, how do you see the team size increasing, and what are you mentioned about postdocs being inducted into your team, but of course there are other people also who are required in your organization.
Yeah.
So can you give a broad guidelines about?
So right now we're about 30 people in the team, almost all of them in R&D. Most of them are, in fact, all of them are mechanical engineers, thermal engineers. We are in the process of hiring, project managers, program managers, product managers, but with engineering background, not necessarily mechanical, but engineering background. Hopefully by the end of the year, we'll be a 100 people team. But in the years to come, as we scale into Middle East and North America, we need to be a 5,000, 6,000 minimum to realize the vision of $1 billion in revenue, which we hope to hit by 2030, 2031 financial year, right? So we have to train. I mean, we take on a lot of freshers actually into the company and to train them, because these are very niche skills. Nobody comes ready-made from the engineering colleges. And we're beginning to start going to campuses, starting with BITS Pilani, Hyderabad, from this academic year. So that will be people who will finish their programs in June, July. But we're also going to some colleges in Ongole, for example, in Andhra Pradesh, just to make sure that we have a healthy mix and that we don't become elitist in terms of the kind of colleges that people have gone to, but we become elitist in terms of hiring A-class minds, right? Or inherently smart, inherently curious, and with some basic foundations in physics and engineering, right? Because we cannot expect, unlike in the software industry, programmers who learn something and then come here, right?
Right. Fantastic. So you are such a fascinating person when it comes to having a conversation, and primarily, I think you also mentioned that you are a sucker for history and technology, which I'm sure during your childhood probably you had to choose one of them to pursue as a professional career, and you turned out to be a techie. But then you have kept your burning desire to learn about history, and that's how I believe you are a well-read person, the way you formulated your conversation for today's episode. So, what keeps Satya interesting every day beyond the professional work? What are the things which you do? What books are you reading or listening to podcast, or what else you're doing in your time, whatever time you have now from your busy schedule?
So it's mostly, book reading used to be is a addiction for me. There was a period in time when I had to read at least 100 pages every single day before I slept.
Fantastic.
Right? So that's 90 minutes to 100 minutes of my time kept aside every day post dinner. Before I sleep, I need to read, right? Mostly nonfiction, mostly about science, mostly about history of science. Besides trying to understand slightly more scholarly, complicated articles that come in, say, IEEE journals and so on and so forth, to which I'm not a practitioner of technology, so understanding is slightly limited. These days, that habit continues, but I don't get time to read. But my drive time to office is 45 minutes. So 45 minutes up and 45 minutes down. I listen to a lot of science podcasts. There is this particular channel, paid subscription only, Nebula, which has some phenomenal science documentaries. But there are a lot of free options too. Discovery has some great documentaries. PBS has some great documentaries. National Geographic has some great documentaries. So I don't watch documentaries. I listen to documentaries on YouTube. I think YouTube is a great enabler and knowledge leveler. When I was young, only way to gain knowledge was to go to a library, and the librarian, you had 5 tickets, which meant you could borrow 5 books. Until you return, you didn't have access to the next one. And frequently we would lose those tickets at home, kept somewhere, or, domestic helpers thrown them away. From there, it's in the palm of hand. And it's my urging to all the young people listening to this. You're phenomenally fortunate to have access to the entire accumulated knowledge of the humankind at your fingertips.
Yeah.
Please make the most of it.
Absolutely. Great. Satya, it was absolutely a great pleasure to listen to you. I can listen to you for next 4 hours also. You got so much of depth of information about not just your industry, but around everything around it, which is what is fascinating to listen to you. This is one of those episodes where I probably spoke maybe for a few minutes, and I had the pleasure of listening to you most of the time. I learned quite a bit during this conversation with you today. So thank you for your time today. Thank you for doing all the homework to prepare for this conversation. So it's a great pleasure to talk to you today.
Thank you very much, SP. Likewise, I hope, I enjoyed this interaction, not just in this podcast, but the last couple of interactions that we have had, extended interactions, very, very much. I'll come back maybe next year and we can talk about demystifying AI, for example.
Absolutely. I think that's one area which is actually uncovering every day something new is happening. So I think we are all learning what's going to happen as things open up. But I look forward to your wisdom on this subject.
Thank you very much. You have a wonderful day ahead.
Thank you. And thank you for your time once again. Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed this episode. We sincerely wish you could take something from our conversation today and be able to apply it to your life in a positive way. We value your feedback. This can help us improve our future episodes. So share your thoughts to serve you better. If you want us to focus on a topic which you think is of importance, let us know. We will share our expertise in future episodes. So, see you soon with a new topic and help you in your career journey.